Good afternoon. Hello and welcome to the Australian Intercultural Society Luncheon, supported by Deakin University and sponsored by the Victorian Veterans Council at the Department of Premier and Cabinet. My name is Percy. I'm a journalist with the ABC and I'm very pleased to be here this morning to be your moderator. I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we stand. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Now, in this room are leaders and representatives from almost 50 different organisations, government departments, consulates, faith groups, schools, businesses, all of the stakeholders in the debate on cultural understanding. Just to name a few, we have the leaders and representatives from SBS, the Islamic Museum of Australia, the Victorian Police, the Albanian Australian Islamic Society, the Australian Federal Police, and the universities including Deakin, RMIT, Melbourne University, ACU and La Trobe. A special welcome to the students and staff from Mount Hira College and Sirius College. Good to have you here this morning as well. I'd also like to acknowledge the former Premier of Victoria and Chair of the Anzac Centenary Committee, Ted Baillieu. State members of Parliament are here as well. Khalil Ida, very welcome to you, as well as Natalie Suleyman. We have the Acting CEO of the Victorian branch of the RSL, Peter Smith. We have the Acting Manager of the Veterans branch of the Department of Premier and Cabinet, Rowena Vague. The Honorary Consul General of France, Myriam Boisbouvier, excuse me for botching your name there, Boisbouvier Wiley, as well as the Consul for Malawi and Secretary of the Consular Corps, Trent Smith. Friends of Gallipolis, Vejihi Bosharan is here as well, and the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria's Eddie McAuliffe. Welcome to our special guests and to you all. Now, for those of you who are for the first time coming to an Australian intercultural event, allow me to briefly introduce you to the AIS. It's a not-for-profit organisation that's been operating in Melbourne since 2000. Their aim is to contribute to social cohesion and foster intercultural and interfaith dialogue by building bridges between members of society. And that's why they organise these kinds of events, so people from different parts of society can come together to discuss topics of common concern. And since its establishment, AIS has organised international study tours, academic conferences, cultural exhibitions, Ramadan iftar dinners, among other activities. Each event provides ample networking opportunities, and that way the circle of AIS supporters grows each time. AIS believes it's necessary to work in partnership with different segments of society, as well as connecting with cultural and religious organisations. AIS has worked with the government and the public service and in leaders of areas of education, academia and the media. They also have relationships with organisations such as the Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne, the Rotary Club of Central Melbourne, Deakin University and the Buddhist Council of Victoria. Now, for anybody who might like to tweet this, I'll just mention that you could use the Twitter handle and hashtag that are on the screen. Oh no, they're not. It's at Oz, AUS, Int Society, AUSINT Society, and the hashtag AIS Lectures. And I'll just remind you now, if you could put your phones on silent, that might be a nice idea. Today we're taking a look at back at events from a century ago, to the actions of soldiers on a distant shore from this one, and battles that had a huge impact on two nations in particular, Australia and Turkey. Now, in Australia, Gallipoli remains the most significant milestone in our military history, despite the passage of that 100 years, and has come to represent a lot of what we know and love about our nation. It's pretty strange, really, when you think about it, because on the day Australian and New Zealand troops landed on the peninsula in April 1915, they were given an almighty drubbing. The Anzac experience contributed to the horrific realisation of the brutality and futility of war. It led to a redefining of Australia's place within the British Empire, what it meant to be Australian. Australia was just one nation in an alliance of many, fighting a little understood enemy. I hope you've had a chance to have a look around at some of the photos, because they help to paint that different perspective that so many of us would not have seen. And we're going to learn a lot more about this so-called enemy. We're going to get the other perspective on this story, a story that we have been claiming as our own, but in fact is a shared history, a shared experience. And that's something I came to understand in 2011 when I visited Gallipoli. It was moving and humbling. I'd heard so much about this place, how awful it was during the campaign of Gallipoli, a place of such death and destruction and denial. Strangely, I found it to be peaceful and a serene place, quite beautiful in a haunting way. The cemeteries and commemorative spaces are meticulously maintained. Old trenches are still intact to give visitors a sense of how events played out. The gardens are tended to with an incredible devotion. There's an incredible dedication to the Allied soldiers and others lost there. I found myself marvelling at how the Turkish people showed so much more than just respect. There was a reverence as well. It's also a very sad place. I was moved to tears when I read Ataturk's words inscribed on a stone wall at Anzac Cove. There is no difference between the Johnnies and Mehmets, to us where they lay side by side here in this country of ours. You, the mothers who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are at peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well. I was so touched by that sentiment and how the Turkish people don't just endure the huge numbers of Australians and Kiwis who pay homage every year at Gallipoli, but how they embrace us. Now, while we focus a lot on April commemorations here in Australia because of Anzac Day, we can't forget the August offensive in Gallipoli, which was horrendous. Losses were great, and there was, of course, the notorious Battle of Lone Pine, which was recently marked in special ceremonies at Gallipoli. So this topic is very timely, and I think what we are going to learn from Associate Professor Mesut Uyar might also be a little bit controversial. But before we hear from Associate Professor Uyar, I'd like to call on Natalie Suleyman, the State Member for St Albans, who's representing Victoria's Minister for Veteran Affairs, the Honourable John Erin.
Thank you very much, Karen. And before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. Of course, the Professor Mesut Uyar, Mr. Ahmed Keskin, the Director of Australian Intercultural Society, of course, the Honourable Ted Baillieu, Chair of the Victorian Anzac Centenary Committee and the former Victorian Premier, welcome. My colleague Khalil Adif, the Member for Western Metropolitan Region, and of course the Special Advisor assisting the Premier of Victoria on trade and business development in the Middle East. Many distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here today to represent the Victorian Government and the Minister for Veterans Affairs, the Honourable John Erin, to launch the launch of this special exhibition. The Anzac Centenary provides a period of deep and thoughtful commemoration about conflict and the impact of conflict. Around the world, people have stopped to commemorate the anniversaries of the battles of the First World War. Indeed, during this time, we pay tribute to over a century of service from the Boer War in the early 1900s to the current conflicts that the Australian Defence personnel are involved in today. Last week, it should also be noted, we commemorated the Battle of Australia, the National Malay and Burnett Veterans Day, along with the Legacy Week, which raises funds for families of our incapacitated and deceased veterans. The events of Gallipoli Peninsula in 1915 hold a very special place in the hearts of Australians. The Anzac, formed by Australia and New Zealand forces at the start of First World War, were sent to forge a way through to the Constantinople landing from the sea. With forces from Great Britain, France, India, Canada, Ceylon and everywhere in the Empire, the Anzacs repeatedly attempted to push through against the unforgiving weather conditions, the tenuous Turkish forces defending their homeland. We're very familiar with the dreadful consequences, the death, destruction, the almost unimaginable strength and resolve of all parties to follow their orders. Finally, in by far the best executed part of the British campaign, the Anzacs and the other troops were evacuated after 8 long months. The Turkish satisfaction at this departure would have been tempered by the terrible losses. At least 85,000 dead, almost double of that of British and French forces. 100 years on, we know that the deaths were just part of the story. Many soldiers on both sides were physically and mentally shattered by these experiences. The Victorian government is committed to sharing the stories of the war. These stories come from many perspectives and many histories, reflecting the multicultural nature of our community. By sharing these perspectives, we not only understand and learn from the human, economic and social cost of war, but we also emphasise the capacity of people to recognise and celebrate resilience, courage and loyalty, even in the most worst possible circumstances. As of the last census, Victoria was home to close to 40,000 with Turkish ancestry, including myself. We're very proud in the Victorian Parliament to have both myself and the Honourable John Erin, the Victorian Minister for Veterans Affairs, and the Honourable Upper House Member Adam Somyurek, who are Australian Turkish who serve in the Victorian Parliament. As Australia and Turkish friendships continues to strengthen over the years through economic, social and people-to-people links, it's the events of Gallipoli that have formed the foundations of this special relationship, and we should always be remembered. Along with this exhibition, the Turkish story of World War I has been noted during the Victorian Anzac Centenary in a number of ways, including through the creation and launch of the Australian-Turkish Friendship Memorial, which is now sited in the King's Domain. Other Victorian Government commitments towards Anzac Centenary commemorations include $5 million over 4 years has been committed by the Victorian Government to further support the Anzac Centenary commemorations, including the highly successful roadshow. The Free Anzac Centenary Roadshow, Victoria's Journey of Remembrance, has been an outstanding vehicle for connecting our youngest generations with the stories of the First World War through to the blend of live theatre, film and discussion, and continues to be heavily booked in our school communities. Other initiatives to assist young people to learn about our military history include the Premier's Spirit of Anzac Prize, an annual competition for Year 9 and Year 10 students across Victoria, which results in 12 students participating in an overseas study tour to Gallipoli and Lemnos, as well as the Western Front each year. And this year, the government assisted 80 young Victorians to attend the dawn service at Gallipoli. This was a very moving and special event, and already these young people are spreading the word around the experiences to their families, friends and their communities. The Victorian Government recognises the importance of these and in particular the people that served our country, and it's very important that we continue educating the public about this service. Over $1 million has been pledged to mark the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Long Tan next year. This will include commemorative service and a march on the Vietnam Veterans Day, recognising the commitment and sacrifice of those who serve in all conflicts. That's very important for our communities. It's important to us, it's important to our children, and most importantly, it's important to the world. We all have an important role to play in making sure that these stories are told in a harmonious way and most importantly remembered for future generations. I thank the AIS for hosting this event and I hopefully enjoy the exhibition. Thank you.